I'm going, it doesn't pass a sniff test because either way, it's a moment of silence. Do you yell, praise Jesus, praise Jesus, praise Jesus during Remembrance Day silence? Because I tell you to shut up.
Look, a moment of silence is not that complicated to figure out how to do.
Well, then it becomes an intellect problem. So glad to have this next guest. Now, a lot of the guests I have in the program I'm personal friends with, or I know, full disclosure. I haven't spent a ton of time with this gentleman. We've talked about him a lot. He's running for president. There's nothing else to say. TedCruz.org. Senator Ted Cruz, thank you for coming on, good sir.
Stephen, thank you for having me. Good to be with you.
Well, I'm glad to have you on. And no tie. I think this is the first time I've seen you without a full suit and tie going on.
Oh, that's well. I just made it home, so I lost the jacket and tie, and I'm much happier that way.
Well, good, because our demo they're a bunch of basement-dwelling miscreants who are 29-year-old males, and they'll want to feel more laid back. All right, listen. Full disclosure.
So are you telling me I would be better off if I was wearing my Van Halen concert shirt?
If you have one, I would have advised it. Absolutely. Listen, if we have you back and you wear that it doesn't matter what you talk about regarding policy, that will be the comment section.
I will tell you this. I didn't actually see Van Halen in concert, but I do have somewhere a Pink Floyd concert shirt because I saw Pink Floyd in 1988 in the Astrodome.
Wow. I am not a Pink Floyd fan. This has started horrendously.
That's all right.
I like some of their music. My thing is, it's kind of the same thing with our generation. I would say the Mars Volta, where music can be great, and then there's a certain point where it becomes pretentious. Let's just put in a bunch of noise, and I'm no longer paying attention. But
I will say it was unusual to see a gigantic pink pig floating balloon in the Astrodome. That was more than a little different.
I can imagine. So, well, that brings us to I just forgot the gentleman's name. Oh, gosh. The Pink Floyd guy who just did that film, The Wall. I always forget his name. Jared, can you help me here? Anyway, he just came out and did this whole thing with Israel, that no one should go and perform in Israel. And I think, was it
Roger Waters?
Roger Waters. Sorry, there you go. That's how dumb I am. A senator's correcting me on my rock history. Oh, this is a rough start. But speaking of which, so he says, no one should perform in Israel. I'm sure you've kept on top of this right now. You just issued a challenge to Barack Obama and this administration. Yeah. For context, they called you offensive. They basically called you out, as well as Christians, because of their position on Syrian refugees. So you go ahead. The floor is yours, sir.
Well, yesterday and today, President Obama has now 2 days in a row attacked me directly. He did it first from Turkey, and then today from Manila. Yesterday, he attacked me, said I was un-American. Today, he attacked me and said I was offensive, all because I'm saying what millions of Americans are saying across this country, which is that we disagree with Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton's plan to bring to America tens of thousands of Syrian Muslim refugees. I think it is lunacy when this administration can't vet them, has no idea who among them may be ISIS terrorists, but because of political correctness, they want to bring them here anyway. And President Obama says, those of us that want to keep this country safe and keep ISIS terrorists out, we are offensive and we're un-American. It really is remarkable.
It is remarkable. Have you, I know Barack Obama, President Obama, is not a big fan of you. Have you spent a significant amount of time with him personally? Is he, no?
Very little. I mean, I've met him at a few events, and he's a little bit aloof and standoffish. But I'll tell you my response today. I said, look, if he's going to 2 days in a row attack me, now it's a little rich to call me un-American as he's standing on foreign soil. But I said, listen, if you want to insult me to my face.
Right.
I said, why don't let's have a one-on-one debate anywhere you like. My one preference, I'd like to do it in the United States of America and not in some country overseas. But a one-on-one debate on his Syrian Muslim policy, a one-on-one debate on his foreign policy that's been a disaster. And if he's so confident, and today also he was lecturing all the Republicans saying we're scared of the media,
right,
which is more than a little hypocritical given that he's usually surrounded by sycophantic reporters who are kissing his behind, saying how wise he is because he never wants any real questions.
And banned Fox News for a while. It'd be funny if it weren't lives, at stake right now.
That's exactly right.
It's kind of, Jared, I'm getting a little bit of reverb here, so I don't know if you want to tone that down. But one thing I will say, It reminded me of Green Day, where they recorded American Idiot, and they recorded it in England. And they got into a sort of a war of the words with the Killers. I think it was Brandon Flowers who said, listen, you have your right to express the opinion, but you have a bunch of English people shouting, yeah, American Idiot, and that's just cowardly. And that's a big thing. Character is an issue here. Yeah. But here's something I want to add. Jared and I have talked about this. Now, you're obviously deeply Christian. I don't feel I'm mischaracterizing you. I don't want to put words in your mouth. But you've not necessarily been seen as a we've had Governor Huckabee on, maybe a social conservative, as though that's your main cause. You're seen as a constitutionalist. Sometimes you do have to go, well, yeah, the Christian thing to do obviously is be sympathetic. Of course, that's not a way of policy. Sometimes you do have to put your Christian hat on, and sometimes your American hat on. And with national security right now, how do you balance the two?
Well, listen, my faith is the most important thing in who I am. Sure. And all of us, the American people, we are compassionate people. We always have been. If you look at these refugees, I mean, it is a humanitarian crisis, and it's a crisis caused by the utter failures of the Obama-Clinton foreign policy. Right. But, the director of the FBI told Congress that we cannot vet these Syrian Muslim refugees because they said, listen, if we get information on them, we query the database, we have nothing in the database. We have no ability. We could, as he put it, query till the cows come home. But we don't have any information on who the ISIS terrorists are, so there's nothing to check. The administration cannot determine who is and is not an ISIS terrorist.
Right.
And so, listen, many of these refugees are legitimately fleeing persecution, but they should be resettled in Middle Eastern countries that are majority Muslim. And we can help with that.
Right.
But the first obligation of the president, the first obligation of the commander-in-chief, should be to protect the safety and security of the United States of America. And if you look at the refugee wave that's going into Europe, one estimate was that wave consisted of 77% young males. That is an odd demographic for a refugee wave. We know at least one of the terrorists in Paris was among those refugees. Right. And it doesn't make any sense at all for President Obama and Hillary Clinton to be bringing in tens of thousands of Syrian Muslim refugees when ISIS has said they intend to carry out terrorist attacks just like Paris here in the United States and to murder hundreds, or if they can, thousands of Americans. We should protect America first.
No, I agree with you. And I was talking about this today. Did you see the Turkey, the soccer game, the Turkish fans? Did you see that video
I did
today?
not.
Okay. Well, let me kind of give you a briefing here.
But by the way, Stephen, you'll like this, but links to your show light up my Facebook page. So
Don't admit that. Don't admit that.
All the time. I'm just telling you.
Do not admit that on air.
The folks on my stream are big fans because I click on things all the time from you on Facebook.
Thank you. Well, today, actually, we just had a violation of service on Facebook. They said, I said, well, okay, hold on a second. Tell me which post. They didn't tell me which post, and they didn't tell me which policy. Listen, I mean, listen, that's why I say be careful, because we're pretty edgy. I'm an entertainer, and I'm always very straightforward that we're not profane, but we do some very offensive things, so people know that going in, and Facebook had a problem with it. We've had denial of service tactics on the sites, angry. I mean, right next on Care, I'm next to Salman Rushdie and Mark Stein. And what people don't, and this actually ties back to the point about Turkey, people think, oh, you're on Care. Well, have they blown you up yet? Well, no, but we have had all kinds of cyber attacks. They've tried to take down the site. They have successfully a couple of times. YouTube, Facebook. Yep. So Turkey, there was a moment of silence. Who was Turkey playing? Do we know, Jared? Was it? I don't know. One of those I can't stand soccer. Men in pink jerseys with buns in their hair. I'm a hockey guy. So they had a moment of silence, and they were yelling out what definitely sounded like boos and Allahu Akbar. And to the point you can see the player reactions where they're shocked. Now, the left has tried to spin it, saying they were actually shouting out martyrs never die. And there's two theories. One was for the victims, but the one they say is they were actually mad because there was no moment of silence for the victims in Turkey from an attack. I'm going, it doesn't pass a sniff test, because either way it's a moment of silence. Do you yell, praise Jesus, praise Jesus, praise Jesus during Remembrance Day silence? Because I tell you to shut up.
Look, a moment of silence is not that complicated to figure out how to do.
Well, then it becomes an intellect problem. But that's best case scenario. Let's talk. Turkey has been widely regarded as one of the most moderate Islamic countries. What would we put there? Turkey, Malaysia, UAE. I don't want to speak out of turn. You would know better than I would. So What would you put, until recently, would we have put Turkey in that list? Would that have been fair from leftists?
Relatively speaking. I mean, look, it has not had the same problems as places like Libya and Somalia and
Right.
Yemen. But Erdogan is a pretty vocal and aggressive Islamist.
Yes. Now, and I'm not saying you would, but I'm saying leftists touted it as kind of like, well, look at places like
True.
Turkey.
Leftists whitewash what's happening in Turkey quite a bit.
Right. So that's best case scenario.
Yeah.
So let's take terrorism extreme. Best case scenario, you still have people who in Europe want to implement Sharia law and install Sharia courts.
Yep.
You know, Dr. Ben Carson got a lot of flack for saying Sharia law is basically incompatible with the Constitution. It's not politically incorrect. Is it accurate?
It's absolutely accurate. I mean, listen, I have been fighting against Sharia law for many, many years. Under our Constitution, it is only American law that is enforced in our courts, and Sharia law has no place. And if you look at, you know, the consistent pattern of both Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton is that they refuse to acknowledge radical Islamic terrorism. They refuse to say the words. We saw Hillary Clinton in the debate this weekend. She would not say radical Islamic terrorism. And you cannot defeat it if you're not even willing to say its name. And this infects every mistake they make on foreign policy, you know, because they don't identify who the enemy is. The reason Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton want to bring in all these Syrian Muslims is because they don't recognize that radical Islamic terrorism, Islamists embrace a theocratic and political philosophy that they should murder or forcibly convert anyone they view as an infidel. What they're doing to Christians, they're engaged in genocide. They're crucifying them. They're beheading them. And yet this president acts as an apologist for radical Islamic terrorists.
Well, my point is, even not radical Islamic terrorists, you scale it back, moderate Islam is still pretty bad. If you're a feminist, if you're gay, if you want to talk about equal rights, it's still not very good. I'm not saying Muslims can't be good people, just like any group can consist of good people. But if you look at any, like I'm saying, moderate Islamic countries, they're not bastions of human rights, disregarding terrorism.
Look, more than once when I've had conversations with leftists, I've asked them, when they're focused on issues like gay marriage and how it's the most important issue from their perspective, I've said, recent years have been very bad years for gay rights because ISIS is murdering homosexuals. Iran is murdering homosexuals. Barack Obama sending $100 billion to the Ayatollah Khamenei empowers a radical Islamist leader who wants to kill us, who chants death to America. And the funny thing is leftists apparently have no trouble with sending $100 billion to someone who murders homosexuals.
Right. What do you do when they say...
Because their commitment to ignoring the evil of the Islamists is so great that everything else fades in front of it.
Okay, we have to go to a break quickly, so let me give you a last word before we go to the break. We'll come back. What do you say when leftists say, well, George Bush was in some pretty cozy relationships with people who were less than pro-civil rights in the Islamic world? Because Republicans have been guilty of that, too. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think what should guide U.S. foreign policy is the vital national security interest of this country. And you're right. Not every ally of this country has an unblemished record on human rights, and we should speak out against it. If they're not honoring human rights, we should speak out against it.
One moment. Hold that thought. Louder with Crowder. TedCruz.org. Stay tuned. Senator Ted Cruz running for president. He is back. I'm sorry I had to cut you off. Our evil corporate overlords. Continue your thought.
Just be sure to send a portion of the revenue to TedCruz.org.
I'll put it through my PAC to your. My PAC will speak with your PAC.
Excellent.
And then I'll call big unions and have them give to Bernie Sanders' PAC, and then only on the condition that he says he hasn't gotten any special interest money. Please continue.
Well, we were talking about foreign policy focusing on the U.S. national security interest. If you look at the Obama-Clinton foreign policy, the one place they've been eager to use military force is inexplicably where it benefits radical Islamic terrorism. So, for example, in Libya, Hillary Clinton's war in Libya, where Obama and Hillary led NATO in attacking Gaddafi. Now, listen, Gaddafi was a bad guy. He had a horrible human rights record. But the sanctions against Libya, the strong foreign policy of this country had worked. Gaddafi had handed over his entire nuclear program. He was cooperating with America against radical Islamic terrorists. He was handing over terrorists to this country. He was an ally in stopping radical Islamic terrorists in northern Africa. Mm-hmm. But yet, President Obama and Hillary Clinton led the NATO effort to bomb him, to topple him, to kill him ultimately. And the result is they handed Libya over to radical Islamic terrorism. You want to know why Benghazi happened? 4 people were murdered. It wasn't just Hillary Clinton's malfeasance that night. It was the failed foreign policy that had turned Libya into an Islamist war zone.
I'm sorry. No softballs here.
Yeah.
It was a YouTube video. Get it correct, Senator. Get your facts correct. When I first read that.
The interesting thing is Hillary at the same time told Chelsea, her daughter, she knew it was terrorism. So while she's lying to the American people, she's emailing Chelsea going, oh, it's terrorism. Then she turns to the American people and says it's this silly YouTube video.
Right. Well, I've talked about that. When I first read that, I've done quite a few videos on Islam. When I first read it and they said, I've had videos with many millions of plays on Islam, I thought, oh no, my video just got Americans killed. And then I saw it and I was going, the video had like a couple hundred plays. No one had even seen it. It was one of those things that was totally irrelevant. Anyways, not to go. Well, I want to go a little mad.
And Stephen, let me make a quick point on that. It's not just Libya. We see the same thing with Egypt, where the Obama-Clinton foreign policy toppled Mubarak. Now, look, Mubarak had a sketchy human rights record as well. He had real issues there. But he had been a consistent ally of America for decades. They toppled Mubarak and they put the Muslim Brotherhood in power, which is a terrorist organization funding terrorists that are trying to murder Americans. And you look at Syria now, they're trying to topple Assad. If Assad falls, Syria will fall entirely in the control of radical Islamic terrorists. And why is it that this administration, the only time they use military force, is to undermine American allies and to further their efforts consistently further radical Islamic terrorism? And I think it's because they refuse to even acknowledge it exists. So they don't ask the difficult questions about who are the bad guys we're benefiting.
Well, listen, Senator, I don't mean to say that you're out of touch because you're dealing with it politically, but we're talking about a generation of people who get offended if you use the genetically proper pronouns. So getting to the point of calling something Islamic terrorism is a little further down the trail.
Look, these guys are so nutty that the federal government is going after school districts trying to force them to let boys shower with little girls. Now, listen, I'm the father of 2 daughters, and the idea that the federal government is coming in saying that boys with all the God-given equipment of boys can be in the shower room with junior high girls, this is lunacy, and I bet you there are a whole lot of parents, particularly parents of daughters, they're not eager to have the federal government saying, guess what, your daughter has to shower with a boy if he wants to be in there.
Yeah, I know. And that's, leftists simplify it to love versus hate. And we're going, well, hold on a second here. This is an issue that has gone on for all of time, the gender differences, which now we have to act as though it doesn't exist. And there's intersectional feminism. I mean, I don't want to get off too far off into the weeds, but I will say this. If I am a Republican candidate, I'm just a younger guy. We have a much younger demo. I mean, there isn't even second place in the conservative sphere with people as young as us. And I actually want to get to something that I think would be important for you in connecting with them. But there are 4 winning issues for Republicans. Free speech, that's a winning issue. The pendulum shifted. Guns, that's a winning issue. And then Islam now is a winning issue, calling it out for what it is. And funnily enough, also anti-third wave intersectionalist feminism. There's been a huge turn from both men and women. Those are winning issues regardless of your personal faith, and people can get on board. And sometimes I watch the debates and Republicans just seem to miss it, and they focus on issues that are losing issues. Why? Why is that?
Well, look, I can't speak to other Republicans.
Sure.
What I can speak to are the issues I care about. And I have been passionate about defending the Constitution and Bill of Rights my entire life. I mean, literally from when I was a teenager. And you're right, free speech. Democrats don't believe in free speech anymore. No. I wrote a book this summer called A Time for Truth, and I describe in that book the Democrats' efforts to repeal the free speech protections in the First Amendment. And I led the fight against that in the Senate. Is the thing that probably horrified me the most about the Harry Reid Senate And when it came up for a vote, do you know how many Senate Democrats voted to preserve the First Amendment in the Bill of Rights?
I'm going to go with 2. How was that a trick?
Not a single one. 0. Every Democrat was on the other side. And I'll tell you, I gave a speech on the Senate floor next to a poster of Ted Kennedy, who, when Democrats tried this 15, 20 years ago, said, we haven't amended the Bill of Rights in over 200 years. Now is no time to start. And I said, are there no liberals left in the Democratic Party? Are there no Ted Kennedys?
Right.
Is no one willing to defend the First Amendment? And sadly, the modern Democratic Party, they are the party of government power. If a young person wants to understand the Democrats, if you think the government should have power over you to silence your speech, to take away your guns, to invade your privacy, to control your life, to raise your health care bills, to raise your electricity bills, to decide what you can do with your life, then you vote Democrat. If you believe in individual liberty, then don't vote Democrats. Friends don't let friends vote Democrats.
This is true. All right. Well, we have 30 seconds. So here's what I want to do. I want to continue on that because as we go to the web extended version for people listening terrestrially, that's where you get off into the weeds with the youngins. I want to follow on that path because there are definitely some things that I think you're catching that maybe some other Republicans are missing. Louder with Crowder. Stay tuned. TedCruz.org. He's getting a nice big check from my PAC to his. Go to louderwithcrowder.com for the web extended version. And we are off. Okay. So this is not that you need to be uncensored. You're not a profane gentleman, but you don't need to worry about people issuing trigger warnings. So you talk about all the things you made are valid points. But then a lot of millennials, you lose them, the libertarians, because of social issues. And they go, well, if that's true, you Republicans want to be in their bedrooms. What do you say to those younger, or Republicans want to tell me what I can and can't smoke? What do you say to them?
Well, I actually think federalism answers a lot of those questions. So, you mentioned, for example, drug legalization. Listen, I personally don't support legalizing marijuana, but I think under the Constitution, that's a question for the states. And I think individual states can decide it differently. I would vote against it in Texas. Texas had it as a referendum. But, we've seen now some states, Colorado, Washington State, they voted to do it. And I will say, one of the real advantages of a federalist system where different states can do different things.
Experiment.
We don't have to debate in the abstract and theoretical what will happen with pot legalization. I can tell you this. If Colorado over the next few years, we see teen drug use skyrocketing, if we start seeing crime rates go up, if we start seeing serious problems in that jurisdiction, my guess is other states will be less eager to go down the road. But we don't have to experiment with the whole country. We can let the people of one state decide the public policy that makes sense for them.
And that's been my position, and people get really mad, some of the libertarians. Hold on a second. I said, I don't believe in the federal Department of Education, but I believe states have the right to create public schools, and they did for a long time. So states have the right to create their own divorce laws. Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's a reasonable answer. Okay. No one gets away with that. So this is the one thing I want, since you're challenging Barack Obama to talk to your face, I've been very pro Cruz in the show. But I've also been somewhat critical. And here's let me frame this for you. I'll start with a compliment. I always say, listen, Senator Ted Cruz is probably the best person on his feet, the most prepared. As a matter of fact, I was on a popular podcast, and they said, well, if Republicans are the party of intellectuals, how do you explain Ted Cruz? I said, well, what do you mean? How do you explain Ted Cruz? And they were dumbfounded. They had no idea as to your credentials. So that, yes. And I've watched you speak, and I say he can go off book. But the big criticism from even young conservatives is because of the measured way in which you speak, sometimes it comes across as the opposite. It comes across premeditated or maybe canned. Now, has your team been honest with you about this? It's not a policy thing. It's not a principle thing. It's a presentation thing. And are you taking any steps to maybe, because this has been great. You're talking Van Halen. I feel like I'm seeing a side to Senator Cruz I've not seen before.
Well, this is something we do a lot. I mean, one of the things to keep in mind is the whole mess of politics goes usually through the filter of the media.
Right. That's true.
So the media shows this tiny little window of what they want to show. Now, you've had the debates, but the debates are pretty constrained, too. If you've got 60 seconds to get a point out, and you've got, the first couple of debates, the moderators didn't want to let me talk. I got very little time in the debates and just had a couple of little 60-second vignettes. Yeah. You look at the third and fourth debates, I decide, all right, enough of this business. I'm jumping in and saying what I want to say. And you think of the third debate where, I listened to the ridiculous moderator blasting everyone and called him out on that.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. It changed that debate. You saw all the Republicans come together and really follow that lead. And you look at the last debate, the Fox Business debate, they did a fabulous job.
They did.
And the moderators actually asked real substantive questions. We had disagreements on policy, but it wasn't a question, you say you don't like that person's face. I mean, it wasn't just stupid insult.
Okay, listen, frankly, I think Carly has a beautiful face. I love a face, okay? They call me the face-loving Bashid, Ted.
That's not bad at all. That's quality.
Well, he's not coming on the show.
I will tell you this, too, in terms of just, as you put it, being unscripted. Everywhere as I travel on the road, I do town halls everywhere where I just do Q&A and answer whatever on earth people want. And so this is me. The media doesn't want to show it. They want to paint. The media always wants to paint Republicans as either stupid or evil.
Right.
And I guess for me, I'm somewhat encouraged they invented a third category for me, which is crazy.
Well, I guess, they would say crazy, and then depending on the story, they'll just throw in stupid or evil. But that actually brings me to something that, Jared, we have the video for him. This is something that, again, while I had to throw a harder question, I love this. This is you and the president of the Sierra Club. Let me just show a few minutes for people watching who won't believe that this exists, and I'm going to roll this clip.
I'm curious if so. I want to understand this. I do find it highly interesting that the president of the Sierra Club, when asked what the satellite data demonstrate about warming, apparently is relying on staff. So
it's just a mistake.
Sorry, could you hear this clip played?
I can't.
All right, I want to show the one thing. Sorry, I missed it right before. I love for people who missed it. There you go. There's that image. Jared, get that up on the screen. It's the priceless image of him leaning back. And this is, there you go. What's going on? What are my talking points? So this is my point when I wrote about it. And not a lot of people carried this. There's not a lot of plays on it.
Right.
He was saying we rely on the consensus of scientists. You ask him a question, and he goes, well, I'm going to rely on the consensus. I'm sitting there going, hold on a second. If the president of the Sierra Club, one of the most profitable, influential environmental impact lobbyist groups, whatever the category is, has to do this, where's the consensus leaning? I mean, aren't they going, well, I don't know, ask the president of the Sierra Club. Were you aware in that moment the BS-ery that was happening?
Look, I was astonished at just how little facts or science or data, and you look at essentially the global warming alarmists,
right?
And they're not engaged in science. I am the son of two mathematicians and computer programmers and scientists. I believe in science and data, but I think public policy should actually follow the science and data. So the question that I was asking the president of the Sierra Club is, how do you explain the fact that the computer models that you're relying on show that the Earth should be warming dramatically? And he actually testified the Earth is cooking. That was his term, cooking.
Yes.
And I said, well, how do you explain the fact that the satellites that actually measure the temperature show that there has been no significant warming whatsoever for the last 18 years?
The pause, yeah. And he was unaware of the term, which is a very common term.
He had no idea what it was. And mind you, this is...
It's like me going, Senator Cruz,
Sierra Club.
Have you heard of a bill? I mean, it's kind of right under his purview.
Well, and a little bit later in that hearing, the ranking Democrat, Senator Cruz, stepped in and said, well, it's unfair to ask him these questions because that wasn't the topic of his testimony. And I actually responded and said, now, wait a second. His written and oral testimony was all about global warming. I asked him, what do you do about the fact that the evidence doesn't back up global warming? And he has no idea what he's talking about.
Well, neither do you, because it's climate change. Senator, I hate to have to keep correcting you. It's no longer global warming. It's climate change. Because it's not. Well,
and actually, Stephen, let me take that point to step back for a second, because I think it's a good thing. You got a lot of younger listeners, and not all of them may have studied the facts on this. But a little bit of historical context puts this whole debate in a very different view. So 30, 40 years ago, a bunch of left-leaning politicians and scientists told everyone we were having global cooling, that we were headed to another ice age. And their solution to this was a massive government takeover of the economy, the energy sector, and our lives. But then the evidence didn't back it up. It turned out the earth was not cooling. Then a few years later, these same liberal politicians and a lot of these same scientists came back and said, no, actually the earth is warming. We have global warming. Mind you, the exact opposite of what they just said a few years earlier.
Right.
And their solution was massive government control of the economy, the energy sector, and every aspect of our lives. Then fast forward to the past couple of years, we went through 18 years with no significant warming whatsoever. The evidence doesn't back it up. And then, as you noted, the theory magically transmogrifies, and it becomes climate change. Now, climate change, for a politician who wants power over your life, is the perfect pseudoscientific theory because it can never be disproven. If it gets hotter or colder, wetter or drier, whatever happens, the magic theory is always right.
Right.
And interestingly enough, their solution is exactly the same as global cooling and global warming. It is massive government power over you and me and everybody else. And you start to think maybe Al Gore and the rest of these guys just want more and more power. And it's what we said earlier in the show. You want to understand Democrats, they're all about government power over you and me and the individual.
Well, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm quite confident Al Gore is dead after the Antarctic sheet was proven to be growing. No one's seen him since. It's interesting that you say that because a big thing, too, because the paleo movement and a lot of these younger people, they're very, since the science on diet directly affects them, they're very abreast of this. And so they go, well, hold on a second. The same people who pushed against saturated fats were this neo-vegetarian sort of lobby, and they pushed for basically artificial vegetable oils and trans fats. So now they're pushing against trans fats, and we've changed our stance. I think, was it the FDA? Changed their stance on eggs and butter in moderation.
Yep.
So these same people will talk about that and recognize the same group, the hypocrisy that switched, yet still think, well, you're just a climate denier if it comes to climate change. And it's a weird time. Same thing, you and I are declared science deniers by believing that the men and women are biologically different and that the ice sheet is growing.
The funny thing is my 5-year-old knows there's a difference between boys and girls. And yet modern leftists can't figure that out. And going back to the global warming debates.
Climate change.
It is not science. It's religion. And one of the ways you know it, look at the language, denier. That's the language of theology. That is heretic.
Right.
Any good scientist should be a denier. The scientific method, what you and I learned in biology class in high school, was you start with a hypothesis, and then you use evidence to disprove it. That's the scientific method. And yet, the global warming alarmists, the evidence is a problem for them. So they just say, anyone that disagrees with my decree, I must have power over your life, you are a denier.
Right.
That's not science.
Well, and what's funny, too, is you could even be, let's say, you acknowledge climate change. You could even maybe say, okay, we believe humans are the cause of it. You could maybe even go down the trail and say, even though none of it has happened yet, we believe catastrophic results. Maybe you can even go as far as Bernie Sanders and say ISIS is a result of climate change. Maybe you can, and still not believe that the United States government can fix it. You have to believe all those things to believe the president of the Sierra Club who's going, hey, what are my facts? Could someone give me the spreadsheet? So,
and by the way, at that same hearing was the president of the U.S. Black Chamber of Commerce that said, for example, the Obama administration's new global warming rules would cost over 19 million minority jobs. 7 million African Americans would lose their jobs, and 12 million Hispanics would lose their jobs. So you need to understand, when these zealots want power, they want power over your life. They're trying to take away your job, and they're trying to jack up your electricity bill. If you're a single mom trying to make ends meet, the last thing you need is your electricity bill doubling.
Sure.
And yet these zealots want power over your life. I'd much rather fight for working men and women than for Washington to have power over us.
Absolutely. And you take it one step further at the Cancun Climate Summit, where I went, and Ted Turner advocated China's one-child policy. My general theory is, if communist China tried it, let's maybe look toward another path.
All right, let's be honest. You're in Cancun. You're not at a climate summit.
Well, come on now.
Come on, you're at the beach.
Copenhagen was before that. Yeah, all right. But it's funny because, in Americans, now let's scale that back, right? I always say let's go to the extreme and then scale it back. So you have it. That's the worst for Americans. You double an energy bill for someone in Mexico who's not in Cancun, they die. They can't afford to heat their food. They can't afford to, you know, that's what people don't understand. You're basically issuing a death sentence for third world countries. And that's a whole thing we get into a whole bunch, but I know you have to go. Senator, one thing I will say in parting, this has been fantastic. And we get a lot of comments where people who didn't even know Governor Huckabee or didn't even know Carly Fiorina. I think with this interview with some people who maybe didn't have you on the radar, you've become their guy. So if I were advising anything, and you can take it or leave it, you're funny. You're funny. You're good. Let that show a little more in the debates. I think people want to see that from you because you're good at it. And I dig it, man.
Well, thank you, Stephen. We're doing it all the time. When I'm on the trail, when we're doing town halls, this is what we're doing. The media doesn't show it.
Right.
As we move closer to the election, we'll communicate directly. But I'll give you something that was just a week ago. I was up in New Hampshire, did a breakfast meeting. And at the end of it, they asked me about my favorite movie. My favorite movie is The Princess Bride.
Oh, we're going to have to disagree on that one, but go ahead.
Well, then you may not like what I'm going to say next, but with a little bit of prodding, they got me to recreate the entire scene where Miracle Max is resuscitating the Dread Pirate Roberts. And so if you want to Google and see me doing impressions of Billy Crystal and Carol Kane and Carrie Elwes and Mandy Patinkin, that happened a week ago on New Hampshire television. And if you want to link to it, my guess is people may chuckle. But I will give one defense of myself.
All right.
A good impression is good. A bad impression is better. People laugh much more at a bad impression, and I do bad impressions very well.
Okay. Okay, so don't go there expecting, well, frankly, by Trump. But that was
Trump was good. That was very well done.
Well, you just have to. I know you don't get into attacking anybody, so I won't do it because it's you just have to think. Okay,
I will say this, Stephen. Your show is huge.
It's huge. It's huge. All right. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, listen, and I appreciate that you don't get down in the muck with politics. TedCruz.org. What's next for you, I guess? Are we looking at the next debates, or are there some big pivot points in the campaign trail you want people to look out for?
We are on the ground every day, campaigning on the ground, building a grassroots army. We've got over 100,000 volunteers. We've had over 450,000 contributions of people going to tedcruz.org. And so what we're doing is we're going to keep focusing on building the team, on getting conservatives uniting. We're seeing conservatives and libertarians and evangelicals all coming together. And my focus every day is fighting to defend individual liberty, to defend the Constitution, to bring back jobs and growth. And you know what? To stand up against the menace of radical Islamic terrorism, because I want my kids, I want your kids to grow up in the land of the free and the home of the brave. And if we allow these lunatics to wage war against us and do nothing about it, we're risking the future of all of us.
I completely agree. TedCruz.org. Thank you so much, Senator. People watching, click the box to go to the site and check out his site, Louder with Crowder. If you like this interview, subscribe or click one of these other videos to see interviews with other interesting people. And you may be asking, how do I know they're interesting to me? That's because they're qualified beyond the YouTube comment section, and they have a lot to offer the world. It's shocking, I know. Just give them the time of day. I think you'll enjoy it.